It's been no secret that 2025 has been an absolutely banging year for new music, especially in the prog rock and metal world. But for every album that's met expectations, or in some cases even exceeded them, there's been one that hasn't exactly set my world alight. Now, before I unleash my own personal brand of campy, exuberant criticisms, please do bear in mind what I mean when I say disappointment. This doesn't necessarily mean that these are bad albums, more that they simply haven't met my expectations. They may be lacking in realization of their potential, they may not be as accomplished as what came before them, or they simply may not be more than the sum of their parts. Some of these I've reviewed already, some of them I haven't, so please do be gentle in the comments section as I detail to you in alphabetical order the albums I've been most disappointed with in the progressive rock and metal world in 2025 so far. Tobias Sammet has always been a bit of a theatrical songwriter, but Here Be Dragons feels like the point where the pomp and bombast finally devour any sense of sincerity or cohesion. This is an album stuffed to the brim with guest vocalists who honestly feel like they're reading cue cards rather than singing with any genuine passion. None of the songs on here feel like they're justifying their runtime, and even the shorter cuts all feel padded out with tired guitar noodling and melodies that you've heard 1,000 times before and better on previous Avantasia records. What's most frustrating is how Here Be Dragons promises grandeur but delivers monotony. Choruses that should soar end up plodding, drowning under layers of synthetic orchestrations and rehashed fantasy metaphors. The choruses mostly just happen, with no emotional build-up or payoff. There's no sense of danger, wonder, or even power going on here, just generic melodic metal dressed up in tacky Renaissance fair costumes. By the time the album reached the end of its exhausting 50 minutes, I felt like I'd been trapped in a budget West End musical written by a teenage boy obsessed with Warhammer and edited by a committee of Dragonforce superfans. Avantasia can do so much better than this, and they have done. Here Be Dragons feels like the creative autopilot album that even Tobias's most ardent fans are going to struggle to defend, and its hollow theatricality left me with little more than a shrug. Now, those of you with good memories will remember that I gave this album a pretty respectable review quite recently. I had high hopes for Waving at the Sky, expecting Orcrust to take the promise of the approbation and evolve it into something more uniquely their own. But this album is ultimately an exercise in somewhat wasted potential. Instead of growth, we're treated to a carbon copy of their influences, with none of the bite or flair. The Porcupine Tree and Opeth worship is worn proudly on their sleeves, but there is still no real attempt to adapt or evolve these sounds into something distinctively Orcrust. The songs kind of blur together in a mass of familiar chord progressions, safe, clean vocals, and predictable, soft, loud dynamics. Even the addition of Haken's Ross Jennings on The Malevolent feels more like a PR stunt than an organic artistic choice. His appearance is perfectly serviceable, but it's just another data point in his ever-expanding list of random guest spots. Ultimately, Waving at the Sky is fine, in the way a microwave Tesco's chicken korma is fine. It does the job, but there's no flavour to remember. It's frustrating because you can hear glimmers of songwriting talent, but the band are still more focused on imitating their heroes than on carving out their own voice. Now, this isn't an album I'll be returning much to because it left me feeling very little at all, and for a band with this much potential, that's possibly the greatest disappointment of all. Another year, another Neil Morse project, and another frustrating lack of creative effort that bulks out his ever-expanding discography. On paper, this should have been one of Neil's most exciting albums, bringing along genre veterans Chester Thompson, Phil Keaggy, and Byron House gave me the impression that this was going to be something creative, original, and sitting outside of the homogeneity that Neil has been slipping into of recent years. Unfortunately, this couldn't be further from what I was hoping for. Deep Water is for all intents and purposes just another Neil Morse album. Yes, it goes widdly widdly widdly. Yes, there's an overlong epic track. Yes, there's instrumental virtuosity, but it feels so utterly also-ran, like you've heard this dozens of times before, because spoilers, you have done. Neil himself described this as prog meets yacht rock meets the Beatles, and in truth, if that's what this was, then I'd probably have this on my favourite albums of 2025 list. But the sad truth for me is that this is just another plodding example of Neil Morse with a paint-by-numbers album that offers very little to justify its existence in a catalogue that's already overflowing with albums that have done this sound better, more concisely, and far more interestingly. For all of Neil's proclivity, I can't help but feel that perhaps he really should just be taking a few years off to let his creative juices regroup and come back with something that reminds us all of precisely why he is so well regarded in the prog rock world. Uh-oh, here we go. Okay. Dream Theater's Parasomnia is a perfect case study in why technical proficiency will never be a substitute for inspired songwriting. This album is aggressively competent, crammed with the usual fretboard acrobatics and wild polyrhythms we've come to expect from the band, but it lacks any emotional or melodic anchor to make the arrangements feel even remotely worthwhile. Every single track feels like a cut-and-paste Frankenstein's monster of riffs and solos stitched together with the creativity of an Excel macro. It's just so maddeningly safe. Now, while James LaBrie has long since settled more into his new vocal register, it does feel that he lacks any of the power or nuance needed to carry these sprawling arrangements, and his delivery often feels disconnected from the music around him. Meanwhile, the lyrics, which used to be at least earnest if they were cheesy, just feel completely phoned in and lacking in any sort of emotional payoff now. But the worst part about Parasomnia is how much we were all anticipating this based on the return of the prodigal son himself, Mike Portnoy. But for my ears, if I'm being genuinely, brutally honest with myself, if you hadn't told me that Mangini had left, I don't think I'd have known any different. This was promised as the start of a new and exciting chapter in the band's history, but it just feels like A View from the Top of the World Part 2. And at this point, the band are so long in the tooth, it would be easy just to mistake them for a group of walruses with musical instruments. I went into Skeleta hoping for a return to the gothic majesty of Infestis Sumam or the infectious hooks of Meliora, but what I got was an album so sanitized and safe it might as well have come pre-packaged with a Disney Plus subscription. Sure, the melodies are catchy enough and Tobias Forge knows how to write a good hook, but there's no bite, no sinister undercurrent, no sense of occult theatre. It's like Ghost have become the Halloween costume version of themselves. Tracks like Mycelia Amori feel genuinely embarrassing with lyrics that read like bad Wattpad smutfic, while songs like Cenotaph meander into mid-tempo Bon Jovi worship nothingness with zero dynamic impact. Even standout singles like Satanize and Lacrima feel neutered, as if Forge is so desperate for radio play, as if he's sanded down every rough edge that once made Ghost thrilling and dangerous. Now, I'll be fair, Skeleta is not a terrible album, but it is an utterly deflating one. It's the sound of a band transitioning from cult gothic metal heroes into arena rock mascots, complete with cartoonish branding and songs that will sound great in adverts for Halloween candles. Ghosts have always flirted with mainstream accessibility, but this is the first time it feels like that's all they're really caring about. Catatonia's Nightmares as Extensions of the Waking State is an album that feels like the band are sleepwalking through their own discography. There is a flatness to the songwriting that feels almost uncanny, as though each track was built by committee to tick off all the standard Catatonia tropes. Minor key arpeggios, Jonas Renksay's mournful croon, and mid-tempo plodding riffs, but with none of the haunted urgency that once made them so compelling. Songs like Wind of No Change and Departure Trails drift by in a haze of almost polite gloom, but never build to anything cathartic or powerful. Now, the production is pristine, but to the point of sterility. Every drum hit quantized to death and every guitar tone polished until it no longer carries any grit or vulnerability. Ringsay's vocals remain technically strong, but his performance feels utterly disconnected. It's almost like he's reading his lyrics off of a teleprompter. And yes, I'm quite aware of the irony involved in myself doing the exact same thing right now, so I will thank you not for pointing that out. Ultimately, Nightmares as Extensions of the Waking State is an album that made me long for the rawness of Brave Murder Day or the stormy grandeur of The Great Cold Distance. This is Katatonia on autopilot, churning out melancholic metal by numbers with no fire in its heart. It's not bad, it's just lifeless. And honestly, that might be worse. Okay, so Sleep Tokens Even in Arcadia is an album that seems to think that genre hopping is a substitute for songwriting quality. Every track feels like it's been assembled by a committee to cover every Spotify playlist possible. Here's the gent breakdown for the bros, here's the gospel piano for the pop crowd, here's the watery R&B verse for your lo-fi sleep playlist. But there's no cohesion, no sense of purpose, it's kind of just a scattershot of vibes masquerading as creativity. Now, Vessel's vocals remain technically impressive, but there is something, I don't know, painfully hollow in his delivery here. The emotive performance feels manufactured, like an actor trying to cry on cue for an advert about cat food or something. The lyrics reach for these grand declarations of love, loss, and cosmic significance, but they feel more like Tumblr posts from the mid-2000s at the peak of Homestuck fandom. Even in Arcadia is an album with the ambition to be everything to everyone, and ends up being little to anyone. Now, there are fleeting moments where a riff lands or a chorus swells effectively, but they're so weighed down by the surrounding beige pop metal that they become unmemorable. For a band that was once hailed as a genre-defining innovator, this is an album that has left me feeling utterly indifferent. Steven Wilson's The Overview is an album that tries to balance his forward-thinking expressionism with the progressive rock that his fans have been clamouring for, and honestly, I feel this ends up achieving neither. The songwriting feels bland and awkwardly structured, with melodies that feel shoehorned in, and lyrical passages that drag on with no memorable hooks to speak of. I mean, if I ever have to hear Rotem Wilson reciting the distance between celestial objects again, it'll be far too soon. Wilson's production remains technically flawless, of course it does, but there's an almost oppressive sterility to it here, like he's polishing away any of the organic quirks that make music feel human. The lyrics range from painfully on-the-nose social commentary to pseudo-philosophical drivel, and his vocals, whilst technically fine, sound strangely disengaged. And don't get me started on the fact that he's still pushing out his god-awful falsetto like someone's told him that it actually sounds great. Stevie, yeah, for real, it doesn't sound like a cat trying to climb a wall coated in Vaseline at all. The Overview is an album that sounds like Steven Wilson trying to preemptively cater to all corners of his divided fanbase and ending up satisfying none of them. It's not bad, really, but it's just painfully middling. And for an artist who's made some of my favourite music of all time, that mediocrity feels like one of the greatest disappointments imaginable. So, there we go. Now that I've annoyed absolutely everyone in the entire progressive rock and metal community with my overt spiciness, and you're an idiot who gave you a platform brand of commentary, I'd be interested to know what albums have failed to stoke your own fires. Do you feel defeated by Death Heaven, frustrated by Fallujah, ridiculed by Rivers of Nihil? Let's get a conversation going beyond the typical "you're an idiot" comments that I can feel brewing on the horizon. If you did make it this far into the video, then thank you very much indeed for watching. I've been Ian, this has been Rhyme Signatures, and I hope to catch you again in the next one, where I continue my battle for relevancy in a world where escaping the 1,000-view ceiling is becoming increasingly difficult. Until next time, guys, as always, keep your rhyme signatures pretty odd.